In this video, I'm going to help you to answer the question, am I ready to start a podcast? We're going to go through this little quiz that I put together, 15 questions, and each of these questions points out a key aspect of your podcast launch strategy that you need to have in place before you'll be ready to launch. So have a think about these as we go along. You can write down your answers. You can go to claricast.com/ready and take the quiz yourself if you want to take it as well. And at the end, it's going to give us our podcast readiness score. So let's have a look at the 15 things we need to get launched. So the first thing to think about is, do you have a clearly defined outcome for your podcast? So this is the outcome for you rather than your listeners, because if there's no outcome for you of launching a podcast, then there's not really much point in doing it at all. So this could be, if you have a business, it could be more sales, increased industry authority, and more networking opportunities. It could be that you're looking to turn your podcast into a side hustle. So you want to eventually secure sponsors and start making some money off the podcast. Or it could simply be that you want to, improve certain skills of your own. So recording and speaking and things like that. So whatever your defined outcomes are for you, just make sure you have those in place. They're going to be your North Star, what you're going to be tracking and aiming for throughout your podcasting journey. So let's say we have a clearly defined outcome there. Have you written an ideal listener profile? Now, this is kind of similar question to the first one, but more for the listeners themselves. So what problem does your listener have that they need solving? Now, if you're just reading sort of stories, it could be as simple as their problem is boredom and they want your podcast to entertain them. But even that, there is going to be some nuance to it. So what are their demographics? What's their age? What's their sort of income, gender, things like that, but also more going into it deeper. What problems do they face in their day-to-day life? How busy are they? What are their attitudes towards your topic of conversation on your podcast? What is their current level of knowledge around your topic? And this is especially important if you're putting together a podcast that's going to be teaching something. Are you targeting people that know a huge amount at their, PhD level or whatever, or are you targeting complete beginners? All these questions are going to shape your content going forward. So let's say we've got our ideal listener profile put together. Do you have a launch date in the calendar? Now, I find this to be really important to get a launch date in, because if you don't have a launch date in, it's going to cause procrastination. So we recommend allowing yourself at least 10 weeks to prepare for launch. It's entirely possible to launch a podcast in 4 to 8 weeks, even less than that potentially. But if you want to get ahead with the content creation, so you don't launch and you're sort of desperate for recording episodes already, and you want to make sure that you've got time to work with any partners you're working with on putting together cover art and assets and things like that, and then allowing for the podcast host setup and maybe tweaks to your website and things. So give yourself at least a couple of months and then just get a date in the calendar, whether you're relaunching or you're launching a second podcast or you're launching a first podcast. Just get that date in the calendar and it will help drive you to making the decisions that you need to make faster and getting your content ready. It's really easy to procrastinate with things like this and make sure everything's perfect. It's also easy to get caught up on when's the best time of the year to launch. So if in 10 weeks time it's, summer coming up and you think, oh, maybe this summer's not the best time to release a podcast when people are on holiday and things, like there is some truth to that. But if it means that you're going to then leave it another month until autumn before launching, it's probably best to just get started with it, because there's always going to be some reason not to launch. But if you've got a date in there and you start creating content, that's going to help you build up momentum and confidence, and you can take it from there and start getting some traffic and start seeing some results that we talked about in the first question. So number 4 or 5, lost count, but it doesn't matter. Do you have a name and tagline for your podcast? So this is obviously important, having a name for your podcast. It should be clear, unique, and memorable, and a tagline that defines your unique offering to your ideal listener. So looking at the name side of that, It should be clear. It should be obvious what your podcast is about. I was at the podcast show recently and somebody got on stage at this podcast marketing doctors session where you talk about your issues with your podcast marketing. And they talked about their podcast that had a certain niche, but the name had, like, you wouldn't be able to understand, you wouldn't know what the topic of conversation was just from the name alone. And that was one thing that they really suggested they do, change the name. Even if it's kind of clever and cute and unique and that, if it doesn't have any indication of what the podcast is about, then people won't even click on it to begin with. And it's going to be much harder to get people in via search and things. So it should be clear. You can try and make it clever and memorable, but it's got to be unique as well. I know you might have a name that you really want to use, but if it's already in use on the podcast platforms, you can check on Podchaser and other directories. If it's already in use, I wouldn't bother. It makes it harder for people to find you, and it could cause legal issues as well. I'm not an expert in that field at all, but I just prefer not to risk it, to be honest. And then a tagline. This is going to be based around your ideal listener. So think about, again, what is your ideal listener, the problem? What is the problem that they want to be solved? This is just going to be one sentence that defines what your podcast offers to them. Will you be publishing video episodes or just audio? Now, if you don't think you're going to have time to do audio and video, it might be worth just starting with audio rather than putting audio and video out but doing it half-assed. Video can help your podcast to grow if you do it right, and you can get your video episodes out on YouTube as well. But podcasting is primarily an audio medium, so just choose what you think is going to work. You can always add video later on if you feel that you have time and it would benefit you. So let's just say audio only for now. Do you know what format your podcast will be in? So this is something you can probably answer quite easily if you've been thinking about your podcast and what it's going to look like. Is it just going to be you talking? Is it going to be an interview with other people, new people each week? Is it going to be co-hosted with someone, the same co-host each week? Do you have a microphone and software for recording your podcast? And I'm not talking any old microphone, although I wouldn't want to discourage you from getting started if you don't have the budget. But I do recommend these days making sure that you start with a good microphone. You can get a good dynamic microphone that's going to give you a nice, warm, intimate recording, whichever room you're recording in, like the Shure MV7 or the Samsung Q2U is $70. You could probably get it for $50 or so used. There's also the Audio-Technica ATR 2100X. I'll leave links in the description to all of these. It's going to make all of your episodes going forward sound much better, much higher quality. It's going to keep listeners listening more so than if you were just using the microphone from your phone or your webcam or something really cheap that's just not suitable. And then suitable software to record your podcast on. So if you're recording an interview podcast, you can use Riverside or Zoom. If you're doing a solo show, you can use Audacity. All of these have free options. Reaper is also a good one for recording locally if you want to edit your show as well. You don't want to be using just the basic recording app on your phone really, or on Windows or something, because they have a habit of crashing or just making it hard to pause and go back and change things and stuff. So just get a proper piece of software. And again, all of these listed on here have a free option to get you started. Do you have visual branding created for your podcast? So your podcast cover art and a logo that fits your brand. This might also include some social media banners and things. Your podcast cover art, it should be at least 1,400 by 1,400 pixels, and it should be nice and clear, be professional. It should have your podcast name very large and readable. You don't need any other text on there. Just some examples here. So because in a lot of the apps like iTunes and Spotify, you're going to be seeing this cover art really small. So these are just some examples of ones we've put together. You can see they're quite small and you can read it really clearly. And then again, depending on your podcast, if you're putting video content out there, you might be creating templates for your video thumbnails as well. And you might also want to put together a logo. So a logo is different from your cover art. Your cover art is just this square that's going to show up on iTunes and Spotify. A logo is something that you can use separately from the cover art. I mean, all of these, you could crop out the text really and use it as a logo. For example, with Podcasting Amplify, we use this little sound waves icon there, and Startup Stories, he uses this whole thing. And then you can use that on your website. Then next, and we're over halfway through now, we've got, do you have sonic branding created for your podcast? So this is your intro and outro mainly. You're going to want to find some royalty-free music that you can use and record a nice, concise 30-second or so intro that you're going to be dropping at the beginning of your episodes. Do you have a show notes template created? So well-written show notes help to grow your show. So these are the descriptions that are listed underneath your episodes on Spotify, iTunes, and everything. They're a description of your episode, but they want to be really enticing. This is the kind of show note templates we use. So we've got a title there, we've got a description of the episode with a nice, engaging opening sentence. Then we got some bullet points, because a lot of people won't be reading through all your show notes, just to show what they're going to get out of the episode. And then obviously the links to your guest and anywhere where you want to send your listener to next. So you can put together a show notes template with all your links in that you can just type up your show notes for each episode. And then you can also use these on your website as copy to help with SEO, to bring in more traffic, help your podcast episodes show up on Google as well. Have you chosen a podcast hosting platform? So a podcast hosting platform distributes your podcast to the major podcasting apps like Spotify. And you can sign up for Spotify for podcasters and upload your podcast directly on there. And then you can also sign up to Apple Podcast Connect and sign up and post directly on there. But really, that's a pain, and you want more control over your podcast. So you want to find a good hosting platform like Captivate or Podbean, Blueberry. There are loads of them out there, and they allow you to upload your podcast, and then it will distribute your episode for you to all of the major apps, and you'll be able to see all your download analytics, and you'll be able to update your show notes and update your ads and things like that. So some of them cost a fair amount. Captivate's one of the more pricey ones, £17 a month. Some of them are only a few pounds or even free. But I'd recommend just having a think, having a browse, and choosing the one that's right for you. Do you have a plan for promoting your podcast to reach your ideal listeners? So this is something you can evolve over time after you've launched, but it's good to have that in mind before you start. How are people actually going to find your podcast? You'll need to promote it to your ideal listeners to make sure they know about it and where to find it. So if you have a think about your ideal listeners, where do they normally hang out? Are they on LinkedIn? Are they on Instagram? If you pick one of those platforms, or maybe it's a platform that you already have a large following on, then you're going to be posting your episodes and clips and things on there. But also you can think about how else you might be promoting. So are you going to be guesting on other podcasts? Are you going to be signing up to guesting platforms like Matchmaker and Podmatch and finding a certain amount of podcasts to guest on each month? So just have a think about the methods you're going to be using and what is suitable for your schedule. So there's no point in thinking, right, I'm going to post every single day. I'm going to guest on 2 podcast episodes a week. I'd start small, because it's hard to know how much time putting your podcast together is going to take up, let alone how much time it's going to take guesting and doing this promotion stuff. So just have a think about what channels you're going to be using, and then you can put together a more robust plan later on. How long are you willing to commit to podcasting before seeing a return on investment? So some of you might be thinking, I'm going to do this for 3 months, see how it pans out, see if we get any new customers from it, or see how many followers we get in that time. 3 months is not enough time to test the waters with a podcast. Podcasting takes a long time. It's hard to find podcasts via search. It takes a while to get that momentum, that word of mouth as well. I would suggest you at the very least, commit to podcasting for a year, ideally 2 years, before you can expect to see the results that you're after that we talked about in question 1. And if you reach 6 months or so and you feel like the podcast isn't growing, people aren't really responding to it, you're not getting any reviews or ratings or anything like that, rather than thinking, oh, this isn't for me, this podcasting game, that would be the time to think about how you can tweak things, tweak your marketing, tweak your episodes to keep people engaged and reach new people. So yeah, it's a long game, and it's just one of the things I recommend before you get started, just having that long-term mindset. Next question. Are you prepared to invest in ongoing podcast production, including hosting and editing? So if the answer is no, that's fine. If you don't have the budget for this, it's just about choosing whatever works for you. So if you don't have the budget, then it just means that you need to think about the time that you're going to be spending each week in doing all the editing, the mixing, and planning your episodes, planning your guests, and so on. If you are prepared, then think about how much money you can afford to spend each month, and the value that would bring you. Like how many hours do you think you'll be spending on your podcast each week, and how much money in terms of hours would it save you to outsource everything? So let's just say, yes, we're prepared to invest something, but just have a think about whatever is going to work for you at the start of your podcasting journey. And then finally, I believe this is the last one. How much are you willing to invest in launching an exceptional podcast? So this is the same kind of thing. If you have £0, then that doesn't mean you can't launch a podcast. It just means that you're going to have to take things in a different route. So, I mean, I would at least recommend having, $50 or so to get a good mic, even if you have to get one secondhand. And then it just means if you didn't have any more than that, you'd have to put together your cover art, your intro and outro and everything yourself. There's plenty of royalty-free music that doesn't cost anything, but if you want to launch with more of a bang, you might need to think about investing something. And if you have a marketing budget behind you, then that's going to help. So if we were spending 500 to 1,500, you could expect to get like your full launch package sorted with your cover art and your intro and outro, all your distribution set up for you. If you had plenty of money to spend on your podcast, then you could expect to maybe have, a full suite of video and audio episodes ready to go at launch, clips, video trailers, maybe a website dedicated to your podcast put together, things like that. So just think about how much you have to spend before you launch. That's the end of the quiz, the 15 questions. It gives you, if you take this quiz, it gives you your podcast readiness score in these different categories. But otherwise, you can just have a think yourself about these 15 questions. If you haven't got answers to all of them, or you're not sure where to go with some of these, then feel free to leave a comment in the comments section below, and I'll jump in and send out also as my email on the screen. So you're welcome to send an email or book a call with me. I'll leave a link in the description, and we can talk about how we can get you to that 100% podcast readiness so you can launch and start achieving the goals that we talked about in question 1. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.